This MindEspresso is about influence, or more accurately, how people get influenced drastically wrong. We have all these people around here who think they're influencers, and they think because they make a convincing argument and they can repeat that argument again and again that they're influencers. And it turns out what they're really doing is they're pissing everyone off, because the brain doesn't work that way. The brain doesn't want an argument pushed on it. Jonah Berger, who wrote the book The Catalyst, talks about reactance, which is the brain's natural rejection of ideas that it doesn't come up with on its own. And so if you can't make an idea someone else's idea that's really your idea, you're not going to influence them. They're going to say, yeah, you're right, but they're really going to mean shut up and go away, which is what Voss, who wrote Never Split the Difference, talks about. Now, he was the FBI's lead hostage negotiator, and he stumbled across empathetic negotiation and became one of the purveyors of it. And to get someone to change their mind who's intent on doing something terribly wrong, like hostage taking, takes a lot of practice. And what he learned is that the ability to empathize, to articulate someone's point of view better than they can articulate it, is the starting point for influence. And he talked about the DC bomber. It wasn't until they went into his background and were able to read back his background and why he would think what he thinks that they were able to even start negotiations with him. So the brain has this natural barrier called reactance, which gets in the way. Now, ironically, the guy who wrote the book Influence, Robert Cialdini, years later, wrote a book called Persuasion, which actually argued that persuading and influence happens upstream, right? It happens before you make the argument. It happens in how you frame the argument. In other words, if you can't change the way someone sees the frame of an argument, you're not going to influence them, right? You're just going to be butting your head up against the wall. And what influencers try to do is repeat their argument in 8 different ways, thinking they'll break down the wall, and it doesn't happen that way. So what's an attack plan on this? Well, you have to get the brain to change a frame, and to do that, there's something called the ladder of inference. Inference starts off with awareness, right? And when you're aware of a new way of thinking, that's just step one. It doesn't mean you change your thinking. Then you have to reflect on the way that new thinking impacts your world. And if you do that and you come to an oh wow or an oh shit moment, an aha, now you're going to be open to a new way of thinking, and you might do something differently. So how do we apply this when we're working with someone if we really want to influence? Number one, we have to start off with how the other person thinks of the problem. If we can't align with the way they think of the problem, they're not going to listen to us, right? And the simple way to align with someone is mirror their language, validate their perspective, and in some way empathize, either cognitively or emotionally, with the way they think. Now they're going to be open to new information, and you can teach them something new about the way they view the problem, the new frame by which they view the problem. And once they have a new piece of information, now we can explore with them what's the consequence of not acting on that new piece of information. This is a frame that was developed in the Challenger model at Gartner, but it's called a teaching choreography. It's how you actually teach someone a new way to think. So once we have an alignment piece, we introduce new information, and we've explored the way that the old way may not work anymore and the consequences of that, now someone is actually in a little bit of pain and they want a new idea, which is your brilliant idea that you've been pushing all along. The problem is you start off with a new idea and that just pisses people off. But if we use the can opener, which is align, teach them something new, explore the rational emotional consequences with them, now we can together with them discuss what the new way forward is, and that's what real influence looks like. Because someone who just talks well and can convince you for a day is not going to create a lasting influence, not going to create lasting influence with you, because the next day you're just going to go back to the way you normally think about it because your frame hasn't changed. So if I can leave you with just a couple ideas in this MindEspresso, it's number one, you have to articulate how someone else sees or views an issue or a problem if you're going to influence them. And then you have to emotionally understand where they're coming from. And if you can't do those two things, you're never going to get to step C, D, E, and all the way to Z, which is where you want to go. So understand where they're coming from, articulate their perspective, empathize with their perspective, then inform them with new information in a way that they're going to be able to see a gap between how they currently think about things and the way things could be. Now you're off and running. And that is this MindEspresso. Cool. Thank you, guys.